Being Mother's Day, I thought I could begin with a story about my mother. It makes a lot of sense, being Mother's Day. And I grew up with an incredible mother. Many of you have met her. She still comes and visits us. We can't get away from her. We have her grandchildren. So it's not about me, it's about them. I've accepted that. But I had a great mother growing up. Like, her love for me was amazing. And I know not everybody gets to experience that, but I did. Like, I had an incredible mother. I was actually thinking this morning about a time when I was like, I don't know if you guys can remember this, but I have a memory that's etched in my mind forever. And it's from when I was like, I think 2, maybe 3 years old. I'm surprised I can even go back that far. I think maybe the Lord brought it to my mind this morning, specifically some miraculous work in this thing, trying to get it to work. But I remember being so angry with my mom one day. I don't even remember what I was angry with her about. But I decided at 2 years old, I was running away. And I went to the closet, and I got my boots, because we lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I put them on. And I said, I'm running away. And then I called for my mom, and I said, Mom, I need you to tie my boots. And she says, why are you putting your boots on? And I said, I'm running away. And my mom loves me so much. She tied my boots. She knew I was going. She knew I was leaving. My mom loved me. That's who she was. Obviously, I didn't really make it very far. But she still tied my boots, and I'm just like, if my kids said that to me, I ain't tying their boots. That's not going to happen. So again, I knew she loved me, and if I'm honest, I took advantage of that. I just took advantage of her love. For instance, because I knew she loved me so much, like when we went to the store, I knew what I could get. I knew what I could ask for. I would say, Mom, can I get this toy? And, if it was in that $1, $2, maybe $3 range, there was a good chance I was going to get that toy. Right? As long as I didn't go too high or too crazy. And even if she said no once, if I asked her a second time and I was just patient, she might say yes the second time type thing. Or if we were going through the store and we got to the checkout line and there was a candy bar and I was like, hey, Mom, can I have a candy bar? Chances were she was going to let me have a candy bar. Or if I was really not confident in how she was going to respond, Mom, can I at least have a quarter for the quarter machine? And listen, quarter machines are nowhere near what they are today compared to what they were back then. I mean, quarter machines were awesome back then. Today, it's like, what? That's not worth a quarter. But maybe I just got it mixed up in my mind, and it wasn't worth a quarter back then either. But I mean, chances are, if I asked her, if I persisted, not overdoing it, I would at least come out of the store with something. And so I started learning that, and I applied it to my social life. Right? As I grew up, I got friends, and we would go over and stay the night at each other's houses, and, the weekend would come, and I knew that if I went to my mom instead of my dad, not that my dad didn't love me, but I knew if I went to my mom, there was a good chance somebody was going to come over, or I was going to be able to go to their house. I knew she was apt to say yes to my request. Even if she said no, I could usually wait a little bit, maybe an hour, and come back and say, are you sure they can't come over? And man, I just figured out I could wear her down. And I could get her to respond because I knew she loved me. She just couldn't help it. She loved me so much. And as I reflect on those experiences, I am reminded of today's text in a lot of ways. where we see a loving father doing the same for his son. Loving him in such a crazy way. A father who essentially tied his boots for his son so he could run away. His son was selfish, was undeserving, and really cut him deep. And yet, despite all those things, the father continued to love his son. It's a story Jesus told in Luke 15. It really is the culmination of this whole recalibrating series that we've been on as we've been working through the chapter of Luke 15. We've talked about the sheep and the lost coin, and now we're coming to a story that's known as the story of the prodigal son. And it's told in response to the Pharisees and religious leaders who were complaining about Jesus sitting and eating with tax collectors and sinners. Because it was like in their mind, Jesus should be eating with people who deserved his time, with people who deserved his attention, people who were like them. Jesus was kind of growing in popularity, and people were calling him teacher and good teacher, and if he was a good teacher, and if he was popular, he should be hanging out with them. Not with these folks. They certainly didn't deserve it. They were the important people, the well-to-do people, the faithful people. And in his actions and in this story, again, Jesus tries to teach them something a little bit different. Jesus tries to teach them how they ought to be valuing the people around them. That's been the theme of this series, Recalibrate. How sometimes we deviate or get off track or lose focus on where we need to be going and what we need to be valuing. And we have to make adjustments in our lives so we can come back in line with our true north, with what Jesus values. And if you recall, in the first story in Luke 15, we discover very pointedly that Jesus values people, so we should value people. We saw the shepherd figure that Jesus talked about, who represented himself, leaving the 99 and chasing after the one. Last week we got a little more into the specifics with how he values people, and we talked about this woman who had lost her coin. And her pursuit of it, how she went to great lengths to find this valuable coin because that coin would either feed her family or it was symbolic of her marriage, and it was super important. And so she lit up the house and she swept every room and she looked and pursued for this hopelessly lost little coin. But now today I want to get a little bit more personal, a little bit more practical, and pointedly talk about how do we value people? How do we value people in the ways that we've been reading and looking at in Luke chapter 15? And perhaps this will be encouraging to you. Perhaps this will be affirming to you. But hopefully it's also a little bit convicting. Hopefully it's also a little bit challenging. Because again, the story in Luke 15:11 in Christian circles, it's known as the prodigal son. And often, like we think about this story, and we're tempted to think about the story as, a wayward son who runs away from his father and then comes back home and the father celebrates. And we're like, that's the crux of the story. Some of us, that's what we've grown up and that's what we've been taught, but that's not actually why Jesus is telling the story. In fact, the whole point of the story is really about how religious people, how followers of Jesus should respond and relate to those around them who are lost, who maybe don't know Jesus. It's really about the Father's love for his child, for his children, and how his children should model and reflect that same kind of love to the people around them. And so pick up with me at verse 11, and we'll jump into the text exploring practically how do we do this? How do we value the people around us? And again, remember, Jesus is talking to religious leaders and Pharisees and how they are complaining about him eating with the tax collectors and the sinners, the outcasts of society, the undesirables. And Jesus begins to tell them about these two sons of this man. And the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me give me my share of the estate. It's like he's asking him to tie his shoes, right? Help me get out of here. Give me my share of the estate. And so he divided his property between them. And then not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country. He distances himself from the father. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the land, in the whole country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. Now listen, you got to be hungry if you're, eyeing pig pods. He's desperate. And yet no one gives him anything. And if we pause there's a couple things that just need to be highlighted. The first one being, I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but the father gave his son what he desired. Did you catch that? The father, granted his request. He didn't withhold it from him. Like my mom didn't withhold stuff from me when I asked. She usually granted it. Like the father grants his request and gives him his share of the estate. According to scholars, this would be roughly 1/3 of what he owned because, this was the younger son. It was the older son who got more because he was the firstborn. But he still granted the request. Just imagine your child, if you have one, or your niece or your nephew coming to you and say, hey, can I have 1/3 of everything you own? Like, what would you say? No! Ain't happening. Right? That's how I would respond. I'm sorry? You think about it, you get your inheritance after you leave. You got to make sure you have enough to live this life, to support yourself. And then when you die, then you say, hey, what's left? Let's give it to my kids. Let's give it to my grandkids. Those kinds of things, because we have to make it or somebody has to take care of us. You follow me? It's crazy. He loves his son so much. He's like, all right. He gives him the freedom that he asks for. The father didn't say, I think you ought to do this. I don't think that's a good idea. He gives him the freedom that he asks for. The father doesn't force the way he thinks things ought to be done onto his son. Rather, he grants his request, and it's a risky move. It's a risky move because is he going to have enough to make it? Well, what if there's a famine? What if there's an emergency? Is he going to have to be dependent on somebody else? Could he have endured it? And yet what this teaches us about how we can love and value others is like the father, when it comes to how we treat those around us and how they've treated us, whether it's well-deserved or not, we can not be forceful and not be demanding, but patiently, persistently, and prayerfully enduring their decisions and choices. You see, we value other people by being patient, enduring, and prayerful. Think about it. Did the father know his son, how he was going to utilize that inheritance? Because I think the father remained hopeful. I hope he's doing good. I don't know, but I hope he's doing good. In the story, the father symbolically represents God the Father. Maybe he had an idea, but surely he wondered about his son. Is he doing okay? Would he be wise with the inheritance? I can only imagine the questions, and yet he patiently waited and endured. He didn't run after his son and drag him home and say, listen up, boy. And the story, was told in a Jewish context, so it's easy to assume the father would have been praying for his son. But the point is, he allowed him to go. That's crazy. And while he was gone, he was patient and he was enduring. He was longing for his son to come home. And that's the point Jesus is trying to get across to the Pharisees. Like, they should be longing for those around them to come into relationship with the Father. The sinners and the tax collectors, they mattered to God, and so they should matter to them. So they need to be patient in enduring the way Jesus was. And a lot of times, we're not like that with people who don't know Jesus. We just tell them what we think and what we expect. And maybe give an oversimplification. We don't take the time to listen and then wonder why they don't want anything to do with God or with the church. I think about it like a young girl in my church's youth group years ago when I was pastoring up north. I was leading the youth ministry, and I remember I was up front and I was leading a lesson one week, and this girl and her friends were in the back, whole room of people, and I'm getting one of those like Holy Spirit moments, and they're just giggling and laughing and playing in the back, and I've addressed them 2 or 3 times, and I should have said, hey guys, I really need us to focus. I should have addressed everybody and just said, I need us to focus, and I need to remind us of that over and over again. I should have done that. But instead, I was so frustrated, I was so upset, I called her out in front of everybody. And I said, hey, Rachel, whatever her name was. It wasn't Rachel. I said, you know better. I need you to straighten up. Embarrassed the poor girl and all of her friends. That was the last time I ever saw her at youth group. The last time she ever came. And I'll never forget that because I expected her to act more mature. I expected her to act more spiritually hungry and growing. But that's not where she was at. That's not where she was at. And when we expect more of people when they just simply are not there, we actually push them away. When we expect more of people who aren't where we think they ought to be, we actually push them away. And even right now, some of us are probably thinking, well, she knew better, and she ought to be better, and she should have been more respectful than that. That's so disrespectful. If I were her parent, blah, 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 blah. The point is, I expect her to be someplace she wasn't. You know, I've got this little girl. She started crawling this week, right? Maya. She's into everything now. I got to watch out everything. And she's crawling. Can you imagine if Maya's crawling on the floor, and all of a sudden she falls and, starts crying and gets frustrated? Can you imagine if I just looked at her and said, hey, pull yourself together, straighten up. Nothing to fuss about. She's not there yet. You didn't fall that hard. Right? She's sitting in her high chair, crying. Big crocodile tears rolling down her face. Well, go and get something to eat. No. She's not there yet. Now, when Maddie or Kaylin are sitting at the table and they're like, can I have a drink? There's the fridge. Right? They can do that. They're there. In a similar way, friends, we can't expect people who don't know Jesus or who aren't as mature in their faith to act like people who do. Because they don't know. And while that may be hard for us, that's the appropriate response. It's so hard. I'm telling you, it's hard. I know from personal experience. It's so hard to watch people make poor decisions, go the wrong way, do things that don't bring God glory. And sit there and pray and long and hope that they begin make the right decisions. Patience, endurance, persistence, and prayer. And please don't hear me wrong. I'm not talking about being dismissive of folks and excuses. I'm talking about long suffering with the hope that through our crossing paths over and over again, at some point through our actions and our speech, we'll have an opportunity to pray for, encourage, or even talk about with Jesus who are often talk to people with Jesus who are often overlooked and dismissed. If you think about it, there's a reason the church and religious people are perceived the way that they are. And too often, it's because we aren't patient and we aren't prayerful. We're quick to speak and quick to judge and quick to become angry. When if we follow the example of the Father in this story that Jesus tells, we'd be a little bit less like the Pharisees and a little bit more like Him. Longing and hoping and waiting, looking for opportunity, trying to be near, trying to call forward. And perhaps that's a reality for us this morning. Perhaps some of us need to be a little more patient with those around us, those we work with, some of our family members or classmates. Perhaps a little more enduring when things aren't the way that we desire for them to be. And in the meantime, praying for wisdom and right actions and words on our part as we are patient and endure. Because hear me, if we're not there, and we're not hopeful, and we're not waiting, we're not praying, we're not enduring, even though it's hard, we might just need to adjust or recalibrate. I know it's hard. I know it's frustrating. But it's what we see in the text. Look at verse 17, because if we think that's hard, go to verse 17. If we think patience and endurance is hard, verse 17 says, when he came to his senses. I think that's such an important point in the story. When he came to his senses. That's what we're hoping for, isn't it? And if we're not patient with people, we don't ever get to the when he came to his senses part. Right? We're wanting people to wake up. We're wanting them to come to their senses. We're wanting them to question and say, hey, wait a minute, how did I get here? And if we're not patient and present and enduring and prayerful in their life, when that opportunity happens, we're going to miss it. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to my father, and I'm going to say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. You guys ever do that? You ever get in trouble and you figure out your speech you're going to say when you come back? And you're like, oh, man, I've practiced this over and over. And then it's not received the way you expected, right? That's what happens in this story. Right, he goes back to his father, and it says, but while he was still a long way off. While he was still a long way off, his father sees him. What does that tell us? It tells us he was patient, he was persistent, he was hopeful, he was praying. He sees him a long way off. He's been watching day after day. And with compassion for him, he ran to his son, throws his arms around him, and kisses him. Guys, I don't know the last time your father laid a wet one on you, but that's what happens in the story, right? And the son says to him, he's got his speech already. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father doesn't even let him finish, right? Quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And the religious leaders, the Pharisees, they're like, what kind of story is this? What kind of fairy tale are you making up here, Jesus? Because for them, in their culture, to grasp that's just crazy. Right? The father would never run to the son. The sign of respect would be the son coming to the father. Why would the father go to the son? The son messed up. The son's the one who blew it. The son's the one who made rash, terrible choices and decisions. He got what he deserved. These were the mistakes that he had earned. The sign of respect would be the son approaching the father, coming back humbly on his knees. Dad, take me back, right? Not to mention the punishment fitting the crime. Again, he got what he deserved. He had treated his father's gift with contempt. He'd squandered it. He deserved to eat the pig pods. When he came back, I mean, he deserved to only be a servant. He deserved to only be a slave. But his father can't help but love his son. He just can't help it. And so when he comes back full of remorse and sorrowful and such, the father won't welcome him back as a slave, but gives him back full rights as a son. And that didn't make sense to the Pharisees. What? It didn't make sense. But that's how God saw the sinners and the tax collectors Jesus was eating with, as potential heirs and co-heirs with Christ. By sitting with them, Jesus was helping them find a way back to the Father. The point being, we value people, or how we value people is by treating people better than they deserve. You think patience is hard? Try going and treating people better than how they've treated you. Treat them in a way that begs them to ask, why are you so kind to me when I am so unfair and unjust towards you? When I trample on what you value, when I trample on your rights, when I trample on how you see things, why would you treat me like a friend? Why would you be nice to me when no one else will even associate or sit with me? Almost like radical hospitality. It reminds me of Jesus' words actually in Matthew 5:38, where he talks about tit for tat. You ever hear that kind of language before? Essentially, it means blow for blow. What one person does to you, you do back to the other person. We used to play this game in high school, right? Where you'd hit one person in the shoulder as hard as you possibly could. And then they would hit you back as hard as you can in the shoulder. And the first person to give up loses, right? Our minds aren't fully developed at that age, okay? But that's what we did. And in Matthew 5:38, Jesus starts talking about this. He says, you've heard it said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. And we're like, what? Are you serious, man? If somebody slaps me on my right cheek, I'm going to knock their nose off. But what Jesus is saying, he's not saying you should just let people abuse you. He's using language here to say when somebody hurts you, when somebody wrongs you, don't think that means you don't have to serve them anymore. Don't think that means you don't have to love them or value them anymore. When somebody hits you in your right cheek or your left cheek, turn to them the other one also, because then you're serving them. Serve the people you don't like. Serve the people you disagree with. Serve the people that frustrate you, that drive you nuts. That's what he's trying to get across, right? Someone takes something from you that doesn't belong to them. Serve them. Show them my love. Serving others, even though it may come at a cost or with hardship, because in so doing, we show that we belong to Christ and we point others to him. I didn't say this was easy. The Father in Jesus' story models this. That's what's so crazy to the Pharisees. He treats his son better than he deserves. As the Father sent Jesus to earth to suffer and die for our sin, he modeled this. The son in the story thought he deserved more, right? He didn't deserve anything. We don't deserve anything. But because of his great love for us, the Father can't help but extend both mercy and grace. And so the question essentially becomes for us, if this is the model, if this is what Jesus is talking about, how are we treating and valuing others? Do people see us treating them or others as they deserve, as they've treated us, or better than they deserve? Again, it's not easy, but it's powerful. I'll admit, too many times, I've sought to get even. I've sought vengeance when I've been hurt or I've been wrong. Too many times I've thought, well, they got what they deserved. Anybody guilty of that? Somebody does something to you, and then life goes bad for them, and you're like, they deserved it. got what was coming to them. Instead, we should be more concerned about how we can help others see and know the love of the Father, the love of Jesus. More than getting even, more than justice, we should care about the eternal soul of the individual. The Pharisees didn't have in mind. They didn't have this in mind when they questioned Jesus. The sinners and the tax collectors, they deserved to be ostracized from community. They deserved what they had earned, but Jesus said no. He said, no, they're valuable to me. I died for them. I love them. I want them, and I want to be close to them. Again, is that our same drive? Not treating others as they deserve. Because the scripture says, like, even pagans will do blow for blow. They'll do tit for tat. Even pagans will treat each other in that way. People who don't know Jesus at least do that. They're at least kind to those who are kind to them and reflect that. But we're the people of God. We're called to more. What a beautiful song, Kate, Ethan, tech team. You had a role in that, putting the words up on the screen. Thank you. What a beautiful song. And if that's not our goal, if that's not our desire above everything else, helping other people come to know Jesus by treating them better than they deserve, then maybe we need to recalibrate a little bit. Figure out where our heart is. Maybe we need to spend some more time with Jesus. And there's another piece to this story that we have to look at regarding how we actually can learn to value people around us, even the people who maybe we don't care for or have hurt us or maybe who drive us a little bit crazy. And we find it in verses 25 to 32. And I love this. I love this last point, okay? While the whole celebration is going on, killed the fattened calf. We've got a robe on. We've got a ring. Like everybody's celebrating. Oh! I don't know how they celebrate. Whatever. Just imagine it in your head. They got the stereo going. Right? Who overhears what's going on? The older son. He's been about his father's business. He's been caring for the flocks and everything in the field, and he's been faithful. He's been true. He's been working hard, doing what he's supposed to do. And he gets back like near the house, and he's like hearing this, and he's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" Like, and so the text says he calls one of the servants, and he's like, "What's going on?" And they tell him, "Your brother's come home, and your father's killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound." And the older brother becomes so angry, he refuses to go in and celebrate. He refuses to go back in. And so his father, he comes out and he pleads with him. "Come on, son, come on in. Come on, please, son. Come on. We've got to celebrate." And all the older son can think about is himself. Like, "Look, I've been faithful to you all these years. I've been slaving for you. I have never disobeyed your orders, yet you never even gave me a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends." And then listen, "But when this son of yours," not my brother, "when this son of yours comes home, you kill the fatted calf." He's upset. He's angry. And how does the father respond? Son, don't get me wrong. You're always with me. Everything I have is yours. All the blessing that I have, it's yours. But we've got to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. And what's interesting about this is whether the Pharisees get it or not, Jesus is talking about them. They're the older son. They're the ones that are so mad they can't even go in. The older son is representative of them. I actually like to think all religious people could be inferred here. But they are upset because Jesus is eating with those who don't deserve it. The older son is mad because he's been doing as he believed he should do, and the younger son is welcomed home as if he never left. That's not right. It's not fair. He deserved more than the younger brother, or the younger brother deserved less, and he's mad about it, and he's so mad he can't even stand to call him brother, referring to him as this son of yours. And that father, he says, he's gracious and he's compassionate. He doesn't treat the sons differently. He comes alongside and says, son, you haven't lost anything. It's all still yours. It's all still here. But we've got to celebrate because the brother of yours was dead and is alive again. And the point Jesus here is making so clearly is the Pharisees, there's opportunity to respond to the people around them the same way the Father does. Like they could be responding to the tax collectors and sinners the same way he is, but they don't want to because they're so stuck on themselves. Well, I'm not like them, and I didn't make the choices they made, so I shouldn't have to pay the consequences, and I those kinds of things. Makes me think, how do we respond when people come to their senses? When people turn away from their sin, when people apologize for hurting us, when they become curious about faith in Jesus after making poor choice after poor choice after poor choice. He was Jesus, a teacher of the law, spending time with sinners. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And as the father in the story had forgotten about the offense, about the past, about the recklessness of his son's decisions, he's now saying the older son needs to forgive and move past his disloyalty and offense. That's how he desires the Pharisees to treat the tax collectors and the sinners. Those who have God in their life, or a semblance of God in their life. They thought they did, right? That's how they ought to be treating. If they really had God at the center of their life, they would be treating the sinners and the tax collectors like Jesus did. The point being, we're supposed to respond to others the same way the Father does, with forgiveness and with hope. That actually might be worth writing down. I didn't put it up on the notes, but it might be worth writing down. Responding to others with forgiveness and with hope. Because if you're paying attention, you notice the Father was wronged. The Father has been wronged. The Father has been treated poorly. And it's not the Father who's upset. It's the faithful child. He wants some kind of justice. He wants some kind of recognition that he's been faithful. Right? What does he say? Well, I never got a fattened calf to celebrate with my friends. As if somehow the Father were overlooking him or mistreating him. What did the Father say? Everything I have is yours. It was all his. The Father wasn't mistreating him. He was mad because the younger son got treated as if he'd never done anything wrong. And then what blows my mind here, I was reading about this in the commentary by Darrell Bach, and he calls it a role reversal. And it's a warning, and it's so picturesque, right? The son who had left and squandered his wealth, the son who was out of the house, at the end of this story now sits very much on the inside. And the son who was perceived to be on the inside, now he won't even come into the house. I read that and I was like, you got to be kidding me. Think who's who. The sinners and the tax collectors they're looked at as being on the outside. And the religious leaders and the Pharisees, they're looked at as being on the inside. And then Jesus shows up. And what happens? There's a reversal. It's almost like the sinners and the tax collectors who were on the outside are now being welcomed while the Pharisees are finding themselves on the outside. Jesus actually tells another story like this in Luke 7 when he is at the home of a man named Simon. And this sinful woman shows up and begins anointing Jesus, putting perfume on him, washing his feet, drying them with her hair. And Simon starts to question her actions. So Jesus says, let me tell you a story. Simon says, Simon, two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, and so he forgave the debts of both. Which one of them loves him more? And Simon says, I suppose the one with the greater debt. And Jesus says, right on. You've judged correctly. And then he goes on to make a statement that whoever's been forgiven little loves little. My point being, I think Jesus, like the Father, wants his children to forgive like he's willing to forgive. I think Jesus wants, like the Father, us to celebrate what he celebrates. I think he wants us to spare no expense when he spared no expense, hoping the best for his son, for his children. I think he wants us to be faithful, even when those around us are perhaps less than faithful. And so if I can wrap this all up in a single question after looking at the scope of Luke 15, it would be this. How are we valuing the people around us? The people in your life, the people you work with, the people in your families. How are you treating them better than they deserve? How are you enduring patiently, persistently, prayerfully? How are you doing for them as Jesus has done for you?